Welcome to Congress in Context. Today, we're diving into the official record from Monday, October 6th, 2025. Our goal here is really to give you a clear, balanced picture of what was actually happening on Capitol Hill that day.
And the big context, the unavoidable elephant in the room, is the government shutdown. This was day 6, and, that situation really dominated everything, especially on the Senate side.
Absolutely. But we're going to look beyond just the shutdown rhetoric. We'll see what legislative work did get done, some serious policy debates bubbling up, and, well, what new ideas were put on the table.
Yeah, there's this interesting contrast between the loud political fight and the sort of quieter machinery still working away underneath.
Okay, so let's start with the House of Representatives. Or maybe the lack of action in the House. It's almost symbolic, really.
Right, they came in at 3 p.m.
Mrs. Fox was designated Speaker pro tempore,
and then
adjourned, 3 due 2 p.m. That was it. Just 2 minutes, then off until Wednesday.
wow, 2 minutes work during a funding crisis.
Yeah,
Does a lot, doesn't it?
it really does. But while the House floor was empty, the bureaucracy, well, that was humming along. This is where we look at the executive communications, the ECs.
Yeah, these are the agency rules getting finalized, sent over to Congress for review, shutdown or no shutdown. The administrative state doesn't really stop.
And one really stood out, EC 2107 from the Department of Education, a big final rule sent to the Education and Workforce Committee.
That one's titled Evidence-Based Literacy, Education Choice, and Returning Education to the States.
Yeah.
That's a pretty significant policy direction being finalized right there.
Significant and potentially quite controversial, pushing decentralization, education choice.
Exactly. And it's happening sort of behind the scenes while everyone's focused on the budget fight.
Yeah.
No floor debate on that specific rule that day.
We also saw a bunch of EPA actions, air plant approvals for Georgia, Alabama, North Carolina, West Virginia, plus pesticide tolerances, all sent to Energy and Commerce.
Right, the technical stuff. And the Coast Guard, too, with rules for safety zones, navigation areas, Wrightsville Beach, the Illinois River, referred to transportation and infrastructure.
So the takeaway is, even in a shutdown, the regulatory gears keep grinding. That part of government doesn't just switch off.
Not at all.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes it feels like it speeds up when Congress is gridlocked. Okay, so if the House floor was quiet and the agencies were busy, what about new ideas? New bills being introduced?
Yeah, despite the adjournment, members still filed legislation. It gives you a sense of their priorities, for whenever things get back to normal.
Looking through the list, you can definitely see some themes. Energy and environment, for instance.
Right, HR 5692 from Ms. Barragan and others. That one's about boosting competitiveness in marine energy technologies.
And what's interesting there, technically speaking, is the referrals. I had to go to 4 different committees.
4, wow! Science, Energy and Commerce, Natural Resources, and Education and Workforce.
Yeah, which tells you just how complicated that kind of policy is. It touches everything. It makes it much harder to actually move a bill like that forward, Lots of hurdles.
Definitely. There was also an agriculture one, HR 5703, pushing for more organic research.
And then some interesting economic and social issues came up.
Like HR 5693, trying to block certain private equity or sovereign wealth fund deals in college sports. That's pretty specific.
Very specific.
Yeah.
And very timely. HR 5695 from Mr. Bresnahan. This one proposed suspending federal income taxes during a shutdown.
Now, that's a statement piece of legislation, isn't it? If we don't fund the government, you don't collect our taxes.
It certainly sends a message. We also saw Mrs. Sykes introduce 3 related bills, 5700, 5701, 5702, all focused on survivors of domestic violence housing, Social Security, healthcare access.
A clear focus there on strengthening social safety nets for a specific vulnerable group.
Yeah. And finally, one touching on local governance, HR 5698 from Mrs. Norton, aiming to give D.C. the authority to grant clemency for its own local offenses.
So, quite a mix. Energy, taxes, social issues, local control. The policy wheels were still turning, at least in terms of introductions.
Right. Ideas being put out there, even if the House wasn't debating them yet.
Okay, so let's shift gears to the Senate. Because while the House was quiet, the Senate floor was, well, it was definitely not quiet.
No, it was the main event. All day consumed by the shutdown fight, the continuing resolution for CR, and also wrapped up with the defense bill, the NDAA.
But before we get into the partisan crossfire, Senator Grassley kind of set a somber tone, didn't he, talking about the farm economy?
He really did, sounding a serious alarm. He used the phrase, not so perfect storm, comparing the situation to the 1980s farm crisis. That's That's a heavy comparison.
And he backed it up with some stark numbers. Low grain prices, but input costs are soaring. Fertilizer up 37%, interest costs up 73% since 2020.
Yeah, and Iowa land values dropping over 5% in a year. It's a real squeeze on farmers. And he was basically warning his colleagues that they weren't acting fast enough.
That economic pain is the crucial backdrop for the arguments that followed over who's to blame for the shutdown and what needs to happen to end it.
Absolutely. And we need to be clear here. We're reporting the arguments made on the floor by each side. These are their political positions.
Right. So on the Republican side, you had Senators Thune, Barrasso, Cornyn. Their line was clear. This is the Schumer shutdown.
They argued they'd offered a clean, nonpartisan funding bill and that Democrats were holding it up for other demands.
And they focus on specific impacts. The threat to the WIC program came up again.
Senator Cornyn talked about Texas specifically, 130,000 federal workers impacted. VA staff, Border Patrol, TSA, even NASA folks furloughed. Real people, real consequences.
And then the claims got sharper. Barrasso and Cornyn asserted that Democrats were demanding things like eliminating a $50 billion rural hospital fund.
And restoring, quote, free health care for illegal aliens. That was a specific phrase used.
Barrasso also brought up a CBO estimate saying permanent ACA subsidies would cost $350 billion. So their argument was, we want clean funding, Democrats want unrelated, expensive additions.
Okay, now flipping to the Democratic side. Majority Leader Schumer, Senators Durbin, Kim. They're framing. This is Donald Trump's government shutdown.
Their focus was very much on the ACA. The healthcare subsidies expiring, the impact on premiums for millions of people, that was front and center.
And Schumer directly pushed back hard on the healthcare for undocumented immigrants claim. He called it a blatant lie, said fact-checkers debunked it, and reiterated that under current law and their proposal, undocumented immigrants aren't eligible for those benefits.
The rhetoric is pretty intense here. Senator Kim used phrases like mob boss tactics.
Yeah, accusing the administration of extortion, specifically mentioning someone like Russell Vought allegedly freezing infrastructure money, like for the Hudson Tunnel project, as political leverage.
And intimidation.
Yeah.
Senator Durbin gave a really graphic account of immigration raids in Chicago.
It's extremely graphic, describing Black Hawk helicopters, agents in masks, children zip-tied. And he made a point of saying fewer than 30% of those arrested actually had criminal records.
Arguing it was more about fear than actual public safety. So, I mean, the gap between these two sides' narratives was just enormous, polar opposites.
Completely different realities being described on the Senate floor. So after all that heated debate, all the finger-pointing, what actually happened with the funding bills?
Well, that's the key takeaway. Failure. They held two crucial votes called cloture votes. You need 60 votes to end debate and move forward on a bill.
Bam!
Neither side got close. The Democratic funding bill, S-2882, failed 45-50. The Republican version, H.R. 5371, also failed 52-42.
So deep stalemate. Nowhere near the 60 votes needed to break the gridlock on either side's approach. The shutdown just continues.
Exactly. But here's the contrast. While they couldn't agree on funding the government,
They did manage to agree on something else.
yep, they voted on cloture for a huge package of nominations, 95 executive and judicial nominees bundled together.
And that passed.
It did, 50 votes to 45. Just enough. So those 95 nominations could move forward.
Wow. Can't fund the government, but can confirm nearly 100 appointees. That's quite a contrast in priorities, or at least in what's achievable.
It really is. And quickly, we should also note that regular foreign policy and defense business was still happening.
Right, the notifications about arms sales.
Right.
A big enhancement to a sale for Belgium, bumping the value up by $3 billion to over $4 billion total. Lots of missiles involved.
And also technical support for Iraq's ship maintenance program. So global commitments are still being processed and scaled up.
Even as domestic funding is completely stalled. Okay, so looking ahead.
The Senate schedule for the next couple of days, October 7th and 8th, was focused on processing those 95 nominations they just advanced.
And there's another cloture vote scheduled for October 8th on a specific judicial nominee, Jennifer Lee Mascott, for the Third Circuit.
But the big picture, the core issues driving the shutdown healthcare funding, border policy, that rural hospital money, they're all still completely unresolved.
Because neither side can get the 60 votes they need in the Senate. The fundamental impasse remains. The clock keeps ticking on things like those ACA subsidies.
So this dive into the congressional record really shows you the different layers, doesn't it? The loud arguments, the quiet agency work, the stalled legislation, the continuing nominations.
It's much more complex than just shut down yes or no.
Yeah.
If you, the listener, want to follow up on any of this, you really can.
Yeah, use resources like congress.gov. You can look up the bills we mentioned, H.R. 5692 on marine energy, H.R. 5695 on suspending taxes, see their status, who sponsored them.
And you can also track those executive communications, the ECs. See what rules agencies like the EPA or Department of Education are finalizing and which committees are supposed to be overseeing them. It gives you a window into that less visible part of government.
Definitely. Okay, so let's leave you with a final thought to chew on. We saw this complete deadlock over funding, rooted in fundamentally different ideas about what a clean bill even means.
Total paralysis on that front.
Yet, in the middle of that paralysis, the Senate voted to advance 95 executive and judicial nominations. So what does that contrast tell you about power dynamics in Washington today? About the relative speed, maybe, of pushing through executive appointments versus getting legislative agreement on something as basic as funding the government?
It's something worth thinking about, especially as this shutdown continues. What gets prioritized and what gets stuck.
Indeed. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Congress in Context. We'll see you next time.